And we're back with another exciting update on if my kefir grains are dead. Things were not happening. It didn't look good. I wanted to know if I could save these grains, but the odds are you didn't really kill them and you just need to give it some time. Don't give up on your milk kefir grains or your other cultures. Try to revive them. You can do it and you'll learn a lot. Hi, I'm Lanny and this is Preserving Today. If you've checked out my videos before, you know that I love kefir. Milk kefir. My first video I ever uploaded was how I make milk kefir. I actually started this channel because I had told so many people about how amazing it was to keep milk kefir, and I was trying to give grains away to all my friends so they could do it too. And I just thought it would be easier to make a video showing how exactly I take care of my kefir grains, things that you'll learn as you're working with kefir. So now I've been keeping kefir grains for like 6 or 8 years. The grains that I have now are the same grains that I got from my cousin all those years ago. They have grown and produced more grains, which I have shared with many people in our community. If you've watched any of my other videos, you know I like to learn the rules so that I can break them and figure out how I can better fit things into my own schedule. And kefir has been one of those things. Most people talking about kefir online say that you should be feeding your kefir at least once a week. That means if you're not leaving it on the counter and making continuous batches of kefir, you would want to put your kefir grains in milk in your refrigerator to slow the fermentation process down. So making kefir takes 12 to 24 hours depending on how warm your house is. That means you're going to get like a quart of kefir every day or even twice a day, and that could be too much for you or your family. So in order to slow things down, you can put it in the fridge. So what happens when I leave my kefir in the fridge for more than a week? Well, in the past I had gotten away with up to a month and my grains would bounce back pretty quickly. This time I realized I had my kefir grains in a very small amount of milk, more than a tablespoon of kefir grains and only 8 ounces of milk in the fridge. I had 2 jars of that. I realized that those had been in there since September and it was then now January. 4 months, right? Do the math. Kefir grains in the fridge in the same milk. So when I took them out, I noticed that I was gonna have some work to do. It felt different than it did when I've left them for a week or even a month before. I wanted to know if I could save these grains because when I was looking online, they were saying milk kefir grains that had been left in the fridge for that long should be dead and they would not be able to be revived. But I didn't believe that. Things want to live, and in my experience, it's pretty hard to kill your fermentation cultures. Unless we're talking boiling them or something wild. Neglect, they can handle. So the first thing I did is strain the grains out of the milk and make some observations. And I had these stored separately because I had one bunch of my grains in coconut kefir. And you can watch my video on how I make coconut water kefir here. So they have a little pinkness from the coconut water that I use. I was just keeping those in separate vessels to just determine if I thought that the coconut water was harming them at all, and I really hadn't thought that. The milk kefir grains that I had used in the coconut water, that jar, it smelled like alcohol. There was no sweetness left in the milk, obviously, but even the sourness had passed and was replaced by alcohol. So I was really concerned that those had bit the dust. The other jar of grains I had did still smell like really old kefir, like way too sour kefir, but they didn't have that alcohol smell. So I was more hopeful for those. I decided to experiment with these by putting them in separate jars and covering them with milk. So here's some of my observations on that day. These still smell like kefir, although they smell sour, and they are still kefir grain shaped. These are much harder and have dried or fat milk like cheese, and they smell like alcohol. So I'm not going to mix these. I want to keep them separate to see what happens because they were in separate jars. This one I'm going to just do a little milk and see if we can revive it. And this one I'm going to do like I would normally make kefir and see what happens. Got raw milk for this. So we'll see how it goes and we'll come back to it in about 24 hours. Then when I looked at it 24 hours later, it was not looking like it should. In 24 hours before, I would have had thick, creamy kefir that was ready for me to strain the grains and use. In this case, I still had thin milk and it didn't smell sour at all. Things were not happening. It didn't look good. I was really wondering, is this when I finally learned the threshold in which I can abuse my culture? Abuse my culture sounds so dramatic. Here's some observations after 24 hours. Let's take a look. This was the stuff that really smelled like alcohol. You can see the fat is on top, and the good sign here is that the grains are floating on top, which is what I always see in my, but what I don't like is that below is completely water. It just tastes like milk. So we're gonna put this back on after stirring it and just leave it alone for a while. Same thing, grains on the top. Good news. Okay, so here's this big one. This is all the cream on top. Scooting that away, and I see this skimmed milk that doesn't look very fermented at all. It just tastes like milk. It's not sour at all. I'm gonna leave it and see if we can resuscitate these baby grains. Oh, I hope so. And then I'm checking back again after 12 hours, and this smaller jar finally looks like kefir. It's exciting. I am like, okay, really surprised because those were the grains that I thought were struggling more than the others, and they had actually made the milk thickened and they looked like kefir. Where the larger jar, maybe it's not too surprising because it's more milk, it's more food for it to go through, so I left it on the counter for longer. Straining the grains from the smaller jar, I did realize that this kefir, although it was thick and it looked like kefir, it didn't taste very good to me. I decided I didn't want to drink it, and I honestly fed it to my dog because I know she could handle it. It didn't seem like it was going to make anybody sick, but it just didn't taste very good. 12 more hours, so now 48 hours later, the larger jar finally had thickened up, and I realized those still had life in them as well. But still the same, I didn't want to eat the kefir in that larger jar, so I disposed of that and immediately put these grains in new milk and let them go do their thing again. The goal here is to keep replacing the milk at least every 48 hours or when it starts to thicken so that you can feed these grains enough for them to revive. This was what I was doing intuitively, and it just makes sense. Put them in the environment where they can thrive, give them time, and see what happens. And that's what I did. It took me another 2 batches after that to feel like this was kefir that I wanted to drink again. And it was 4 more batches after that when it was just back to normal, where I was getting kefir after 24 hours. Then I started to see baby grains forming in my kefir again and knew that my grains were doing what they needed to and they'd be replacing themselves soon, and I would have more to share with friends again. So I make this video to tell you, even if you're imperfect and you can't take care of things the way the internet says is optimal, don't feel like you can't take care of them in a way that's best for you. I can still keep kefir grains, even if I'm going to make a mistake of leaving them for 4 months and just not even checking in. It's possible to do these things in a way that works for you. I feel like we've been going through this huge movement of resurgence of getting back to basic skills that used to be commonplace in our households. And I think that's wonderful. But coupled with the internet age, I feel like there's some unrealistic aspects. I'm thinking there's a right way to do things and a wrong way, and that there's no gray area. And the reality is there is an infinite amount of ways to do things. I shouldn't be expected to watch somebody making sourdough in Florida and think that's going to be exactly the same for me here in Northwest Washington when it's snowing out. So give yourself grace, go easy on it, and just get started. And what's the worst that can happen? Yeah, you had some dead kefir grains and you need to start over. Okay, but the odds are you didn't really kill them and you just need to give it some time. Really, the worst part of this was wasting the raw milk that we get from a local farm. And again, it wasn't wasted because we fed it to the dog, but that stuff's expensive and it was kind of hard to get these started. It probably would have been more cost effective for me to just buy new grains, but I wouldn't have learned as much, and I wouldn't have been able to keep these grains that now have this great history. I got them from my cousin and I've been keeping them for this many years. It matters to me, so it was worth it. That's it for today. Don't give up on your milk kefir grains or your other cultures. Try to revive them. You can do it and you'll learn a lot. Thanks for watching. I'm Lanny and this was Preserving Today.